This is Tom Dillon, the Lifetime Liberal, and today is Wednesday, February 1st, 2017. The title of this rant will be U.S. Raid against al-Qaeda in Yemen. Does that equal more military forces in the Middle East for the U.S.? So the White House announced just yesterday or the day before that one U.S. Navy SEAL team member was killed, 3 others were hurt or wounded in a raid against al-Qaeda in Yemen. What they didn't mention, which has come out subsequently since then, that in addition to that, there were up to 16 civilians that were killed, including a number of women and children. The pushback from the military was that possibly those women were actually part of al-Qaeda, that meaning that they were actually military operatives, so to speak. And that they actually lost, meaning the U.S. lost a U.S. Osprey, which is the tilt rotor engine, and that the raid was conducted with a couple Apache helicopters. Now, this raid was authorized by Mr. Minority and his administration. It was planned during the Obama administration, and so it's but is this going to be the type of escalation that will put more U.S. troops on the ground in the Middle East, whether it's in Yemen, whether it's in Syria, whether it's in Iraq? And of course, we have this immigration ban, which isn't going to help out that much. But let's remember that when this came out, the administration obviously honored the Navy Team SEAL 6 person that had died, and it also bragged that they had gotten tremendous amount of information out of it. Now, we don't know if that's really true or not in terms of the information, but they have to justify it in some way, and that's what they did. And of course, the trickle-down stuff was we found out that civilians were killed in this, up to 16 civilians, and one of them was an 8-year-old girl whose father was born in the U.S. I do believe he then became an al-Qaeda operative and was killed in a drone strike in 2011, I believe. According to that little girl's grandfather, that she was shot in the neck and was allowed to bleed to death for over a period of 2 hours, which doesn't look good if any of that more information is true and any more of that comes trickling out. Now, Yemen is basically the poorest country in Asia, and for the last 2 or 3 years, it's been basically a proxy war with the United States and Saudi Arabia against Iran, even though the rebels in Yemen are not necessarily fully aligned with Iran, let's just say. But Saudi Arabia has done bombing. They have done indiscriminate bombing. There have been many reports over the years where civilians were targeted, civilian areas were hit, and that there was many civilian casualties. And again, the airstrikes in a lot of ways were indiscriminate. There have been reports that they have used white phosphorus, which is bombs that they could only have gotten from the United States. That would have been in the Obama administration, yes. And that even yesterday there were reports that a Saudi warship was shelling Yemen from sea. Now, if we take a quick step back, Syria has been the predominantly big concern, even though there's huge concerns about Mosul, there's huge concerns about what's going on in Iraq and what's going on in Iran at the same time. But before the Syrian genocide started going on, that there had always been that the concern of the U.S. military was that al-Qaeda AP, meaning Al-Qaeda Arabian Peninsula, was the gravest threat in terms of terrorism in the Middle East. We actually had, meaning the U.S., had, I won't call it necessarily a base, a small outpost in Yemen for a while, and then we packed up and just moved out of there. And shortly after that, the fighting sort of started over there. But the big thing is this a threat, and will there be an escalation of U.S. forces in the Middle East and possibly starting in Yemen? Remember, Mr. Minority bragged quite a bit of how he was going to get rid of ISIL. And let's just see where this is going from here. Now, another thing on this is, remember, the White House was in front on this. This wasn't done by the military. This was done by the White House bringing this up and bragging about what great information they got on this. And what we always find out later on is a little bit tainted. Yes, let's say there were 14 al-Qaeda operatives killed, but there were also women and children, civilians that were killed. And will we find out, will there be more trickle of that coming out? But what's happening, and the reason that I'm saying this, is that the minority administration is coming out ahead on all of this stuff. So that the stuff that trickles down, no one's going to pay any attention to that, because the minority administration is going to be on some other shiny object a couple days from now, as we find out what's really went on in terms of what happened in that raid. And this is a very, very clear sign that they want to get, let's say, public opinion in their favor, especially those who are willing, saying that we really need to clean up things in the Middle East. So what we have is boots on the ground in Yemen. And does that portray that there will be an increased involvement in the Middle East, whether it be in Yemen or whether it be in Syria? I'll just talk about Syria for one quick minute. Is that, hey, the minority administration during the campaign had talked about having safe zones in Syria. And right now, any type of safe zone would have to have a no-fly zone, which would have to be approved of by Syria, and also by Russia, and probably also by Turkey. And it would involve up to 30,000 U.S. military personnel. That would cost about $1 billion a month. So we'll see what's going to be happening, but I think that the first indications that the minority administration is going to be further involved in the Middle East with boots on the ground. I think they foreshadowed that just 2 days ago with the raid in Yemen.